ask you, obviously this is teaser content for the book, but a few quick questions. One, from your travels, is the U.S. at risk of being left behind in some ways, either because of the regulatory response or that somewhat narrow worldview?
Well, we'll see about that. I think that whereas the U.S. in the past, it's been theirs to lose because of all of those things that made Silicon Valley a tech Galapagos.
Mm-hmm.
This time it's very different. And what we're seeing right now in the U.S. is interesting. At the same time that the securities regulator has taken a very broad approach to this new asset class and is trying to, basically say that almost any new innovation in the space is under their mandate, we're seeing
Mm-hmm.
other parts of the world take a very different approach. In the UK, for example, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak,
Mm-hmm.
recently said that he wants to make the UK the Web3 capital of the world. In the United Arab Emirates, they've announced the launch of a multi-billion-dollar fund to support innovation and attract entrepreneurs. Even in Hong Kong and mainland China, which historically has been somewhat reluctant to embrace this stuff, we're seeing a thawing there. So I don't want to overstate what's going on as if this is some big power shift that's happening in the world, but I do think that the U.S. mentally at risk of missing out on this. And why is that important? Well, if this new era of the web is anything like past eras of the web, it's going to create untold wealth, many jobs, and new innovations that I think the U.S. probably thinks it has a vested interest in maintaining a lead in, right? What is the U.S. the leader in? The U.S. is leader in, well, several areas, including things like obesity,
Yeah.
but also things like technology and financial services. And this is a technology tool that hits both of those head on.
Would there be any companies on your radar that you would put on ours? I mean, because each, it's like we're at this period where there's 100 car companies, and from that emerge, the top three. Is that likely to happen here? Certainly, people look at. You mentioned Sam Altman. OpenAI being one of the big winners, certainly thus far in terms of generative AI. Who are some of the players, or is it too early to say, that really could be the next wave of titans from what you see?
It's such an interesting question for several reasons. In the 1990s, Wall Street analysts were convinced that there were a group of excellent businesses that everyone needed to own. They had, great management teams and deep moats, and they had, loyal customers. Companies like Kodak and Polaroid and, Tower Records and Sears Roebuck and Macy's and so on and so forth. But what every single one of those companies had in common was that they were all about to be disintermediated in a way by the internet. And that doesn't mean that they were doomed to fail, by the way. It just meant that they didn't fully embrace Web1, as it was called, when they had the chance. And I think that this time it's very similar. There are lots of existing companies out there that we might say today are, strong in their respective industries, but might be disintermediated by Web3. There are also going to be new champions, to your point. There are going to be new kinds of companies that emerge and new kinds of projects. One thing I think that is different is that, unlike in the past, value is getting created both at the company level, but also at the protocol level. And I know that sounds a bit jargony, but basically things like Ethereum, for example, aren't really corporations, right? They're not at all corporations. They are decentralized networks that are self-maintaining using a token, right? And that token value of Ethereum is worth more than all the companies in Web3 combined. Ethereum's got a market value of around 200 billion US dollars. Coinbase, which is an excellent company, and one of the leading on-ramps into this asset class, listed on the
I have to
US.
ask, are you an investor in Coinbase?
I actually can't comment on that. I'm not allowed to say it.
I don't want to say excellent company and leave that like, well, wait a second there. Okay.
Well, by excellent company, I simply mean they've done a great job of onboarding tens of millions of people, and I think have operated in a really strong
it's certainly
way.
Democratized access, right, to a lot of this stuff.
But even still, just to finish the thought, like Coinbase is a tenth the size of Ethereum, right? So I think a lot of value accrual in Web3 is actually not going to necessarily happen in companies. It's going to happen in protocols.
Okay. Good. Well, listen, the book is Web3. More to come. Anything else that's on your radar, Alex, right now in terms of the perils? Because obviously, these are times where a lot of money's made, but it's also times where people trip up. What advice do you have tactically at this stage from your research for people to avoid or look for?
Well, I think that the risk of inaction is much greater than the risk of action, for one. And I think that for most people who I hope will read the book, a lot of them haven't really even begun their Web3 journey. So I think that that's the starting point you have to go with. And I think that the advice is different depending on who you are. I mean, if you're a student, I think you're luckiest of them all. Like, you have an opportunity to become an expert in emerging technologies and be a leader, in an organization from day one. And I think that's kind of exciting. If you're an existing business leader, you've got to think about both how this could disrupt your business, but also how you could harness this technology in the way that a lot of great companies took advantage of the web, right?
Right.
If you're in government, you've got a very difficult thing that you have to figure out. On the one hand, you want to make sure you protect consumers and penalize wrongdoers, but you also want to create the conditions for innovation to work in your country. I hope, right? You're trying to create jobs and grow your tax base and create prosperity. So you've got to figure out how to navigate that as well. I think the first thing that everyone should think about doing is just to get started. And the best way to do that is by pre-ordering my book.
There you go. There's the plug. Okay.
I had
can't
to do
think
it.
of a better place to end
I have
there.
the book.
It's not out till September, but this is certainly, I think, a good baseline, and I'm sure much will change given the speed at which this is happening. So, Alex, thank you for joining us, and good luck. Look forward to future conversations.
My pleasure. Thanks.